All right. Well, we come back for session 2. And in this session, we want to redefine strongholds. I was at Christ for the Nations teaching a month or two ago, and before every session, 800 students would stand up and start shouting, "Sea story, sea story, sea story." So I've learned the importance of starting out with a sea story. As we journeyed down to Antarctica, one of the things that the team leader had told us is we were going to be every day walking among the seals and the penguins and just the wildlife that was everywhere. They said at first you're going to be a little bit anxious because you're not really knowing how the wildlife is going to respond to you. But he said if you can move past the anxiety, if you can move past any fear, and if you just go in and you just sit down among these thousands of penguins and just try to commune with the purpose behind of all creation and just be there, because they call Antarctica God's country, is what the explorers call it. And as you go down there, you see so clearly why, because just God is everywhere through the wonders of creation. And so he said, try to make peace with creation. And if you'll make peace with creation, all of creation will be drawn to you. But if you can't make peace with creation, all of creation will be repelled from you. So sure enough, as we make landfall one of the first days and go among the penguins, and the expedition just kind of scattered out and went their own way, hiking for a few hours. And I went into one penguin colony, and it was hard to find a place to sit down. He said, just sit on a rock. Well, all the rocks got that stuff on it. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I finally found one that apparently they just left alone for some reason. And when I first moved among the colony, all these gentoo and chin-strap penguins about 30 inches tall are just squawking, and they're running from you, and they're just terrified, because when I went in there and I had fear and anxiety in my heart, what was their response? With fear and anxiety. So I finally went over in the middle of the colony and I just sat down. And I just said, God, just help me be at peace with everything around me. And I'm just communing with God, and I'm just sitting there. And you know, in Antarctica, I learned to pray in a totally different way. I learned to commune with God in a completely different way. No longer was it just hearing His voice. It was seeing the voice of God in creation. And I had never, ever considered seeing the voice of God. But then somehow, as I was able to enter in that place of being at rest, the penguins begin to see the voice of God in you. Do people see God's voice in your everyday life, actions, and countenance? Because many people, before they ever hear the voice of God, first want to see it in you. Are they drawn to the purposes of creation in you? And as long as I was filled with anxiety or fear, creation was repelled from me. But as I began to see the voice of God in creation, I entered into a realm of rest, and I realized creation wants to know you. And the penguins start waddling over to you. I mean, one at a time, and there's always a pecking order, and they're always in a line. And it's funny, it's like dominoes, because they're really clumsy on land, and when one falls down, and then they start gathering all around you, and everyone just starts coming in, and they all start moving closer. And I said, man, if Christians could get a hold of this. But so many are filled with such aggressive striving and hyper-religious activity and competing and vying to build their own little kingdom. So many are filled with where we were at in the first session, darkness of my pleasure is my pleasure, and I live to draw people to my kingdom. And there's so much energy that's dispelled in trying to draw people to us, that in reality, we end up repelling creation from us. And see, when we move beyond the strongholds in our life that hinder us from living to receive God's love and to give it away, we enter into a rest, and then what happens? People begin to see the voice of God in you where you work. This is marketplace ministry. This is where it begins. Is when people see your life and they realize we can taste of the purposes of God in you. And whether it be the penguins, whether it be the seals, whether it be the humpback whales that were just drawn to the sailboat, and you'd shut your engines down, and the captain say, no, don't do any sudden movements, no anxiety, no fear, and watch. And they just come within literally inches of your hand, 40, 45-foot great humpback whales, and they just come up, and they want to know you. Creation wants to know you. People are starving and looking for God in your life. But see, there's something in each of our lives that exalts itself above the knowledge of God. And let's see together in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 4 and 5, the foundational verse for this weekend. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses, or in the King James Version, strongholds. We are destroying speculations. That word speculations, it's imaginations in the King James, but in Greek it means reasonings, thoughts, and imaginations that precede and determine our conduct. Now what happens? You walk into the penguin colony and fear and anxiety. You're feeling it. There's thoughts, there's reasons. What if 1,000 of these mob me at one time? You know, you walk into a seal colony with about a dozen seals there, and I mean, they're 3 times your size, and what if they decide to take me out? And your imaginations are just running amok. Nobody likes me here. Man, I'm the alien amongst all these penguins and seals. They're going to get me. If I come into the room, I know somebody's going to give it to me sooner or later. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me. And then what's it do? Repels creation from you. But what if you come in a belief structure that I was created in God's image? I was created by love. I was conceived by love. Every human being, a plan of God. I don't care if you were born outside of wedlock. So was Jesus. You're in good company. But God chose you. God created you. God formed you in Psalm 139. You're the work of His hand that was created with one destiny in mind, living to receive God's love so that creation sees God in you. What would happen if we believed that? How would it affect our marriage? How would it affect our children? How would it affect the generations yet to come? But see, there's back to verse 5, there's speculations in every lofty thing that raises itself above the knowledge of God, and with a little liberty that raises itself above the knowledge of God's love. How much He loves you individually. And how much He wants others to be drawn to that love that they see in you. And it has nothing to do with how tall you are, how short you are, how wide you are, how thin you are, how old you are. All of creation will be drawn to you. Whether the 45-foot humpbacks or the 30-inch Gen 2 penguins, drawn to you when you're at rest. And in every place that we're not at rest in love, there's something exalting itself above the knowledge of God's love. And in these verses, we see it's a fortress, or it's a stronghold. Now, let me give you 4 people's definitions of this word stronghold here. I love Watchman Nee's definition. He says, a stronghold is an argument, a reasoning, or a theory that we give ourselves to keep doing what we've always done before. It's arguments, reasons, and theories that we give ourselves to keep doing what we've always done before. I like Mike Bickle in Passion for Jesus definition. A stronghold is a collection of thoughts that are lies against what God has revealed about himself. Neither of these call it demonic. They both call it an issue of thoughts, a collection of thoughts. I love what Francis Frangipane says in his book, The Three Battlegrounds. He says in that book, and this book changed my thought of what a stronghold was, because for 10 years I always thought a stronghold was a demonic issue. And then Francis says, no. He says a stronghold is a fortress of thought that has become like a castle. Of itself, it is not demonic. It's a fortress of thought. But if you let the fortress of thought remain, demonic powers have a right to occupy that fortress. And he goes on and says, if you cast out the demonic powers, but the fortress of thought remains, within a short period of time, what comes back? It's the fortress of thought, the mental stronghold, that gives the enemy a right to come in and harass your life. John and Paula Sanford, they call it a habit structure of thought. And I saw that one. I said, I like that one, a habit structure of thought. I looked up a definition of habit. An act repeated so often, it is involuntary. There is no new decision of mind each time the act is performed. And I thought, wow. If it's a habit structure of thought, a habit is thoughts that have been repeated so often, they're involuntary. I walk into a room, nobody likes me. I'm not going to talk to anybody, because if I talk to anybody, sooner or later they're going to give it to me. So I'm just going to hide in a corner. My wife's out there. Everybody loves me. Aren't I just wonderful? And I'm back over there, and she says, what's the matter with you? Enjoy the party. Nobody wants to be around me. I mean, I just bristle at everything. You see, a habit structure of thought that I've repeated. How many times did I repeat that thought as a child? Every time I came into the house, every time I was told to stay quiet and I had no voice, every time I'm just to literally be a ghost within my own house. Children are to be seen, but not ever to be heard. A habit structure of thinking's built. And thank God, once I get born again, I'm a new creation, and I never struggle with that habit structure of thinking again, do I? No. My spirit man is brand new in Christ, and I am a new creation in Christ. But my soul, my mind, will, emotions, and personality is filled with these ungodly beliefs, these habit structures of thinking. And there's an interesting thing about habits. They have a life of their own. I used to love coffee. I still do. But because of some vocal cord issues, I'm not supposed to be drinking it. But when I walked by Starbucks at the Cincinnati airport, it was talking to me. Tell me, when you try to fast for a day, do the potato chips in the cupboard talk to you that night? When everybody else is eating ice cream and you're just trying to be good, I mean, does it call out to you from the refrigerator? Habits have a voice of their own, don't they? And are habits all demonic? Can there be demonic influence to habits? Yes. But are all habits demonic? But do all habits have a voice of their own and a life of their own? A habit structure of thinking that is constantly speaking to you, what the Greeks say it is, thoughts, reasonings, and imaginations from verse 5 that precede and determine our actions. Because strongholds are relational. They are behavioral. They're habit structures of thinking that affect every relationship that you have. And let's look at some of the characteristics of strongholds. How can we help identify them, see them? One, strongholds are habit structures of thought that exist in the area of our soul. They are so hidden within the soul that they have the ability to influence the negative thought patterns of our life. Secondly, strongholds are habitual lies that we have embraced at the core of our inner being. They are built by a foundation of lies and half-truths. And so they've become a fortress of thought that influence the way we respond to the truth about God's character. I come to the Lord in 1980, and my immediate concept of God is He's angry, and He expects you to pray more, and He expects you to read the Bible more, and you've got to be better. And when I prayed 20 minutes a day, it wasn't enough. So I prayed 30 minutes a day. It wasn't enough. So I prayed an hour a day. It wasn't enough. So I prayed 2 hours a day. Still not enough. Have you noticed you can never pray enough? You can never read enough Bible. You can never be good enough. And I could never be good enough for God. And if you feel like you could never be good enough, then what's your relationship with God always like? You're always struggling, striving, trying to be better, trying to do more. Where did that come from? It's a habit structure of thinking. There was a voice of its own. Well, if you prayed 10 minutes a day, why don't you pray 15? If you read a chapter in the day in the Word, why don't you read 2? There's a constant voice. Where did that voice come from? Now, certainly we know that demonic influences can be involved in that, but where did it all begin? What opened the door? I could never cut the grass well enough for my dad. I could never make good enough grades. If I came home with 4 A's and a B, he didn't mention the 4 A's, he pointed out the B. If I made my bed up, he didn't point how well I made the bed up. He pointed out the crease that was still there because he'd been a military man. And it was always, I had to do better, I had to do more. And it develops a habit pattern of thinking that there's nothing I can do that is ever going to be good enough to please my dad. It becomes a fortress of thought. It becomes an ungodly belief. And then I start walking with God, and I see God through the lens of my earthly father's voice. A stronghold that exalts itself above the knowledge of God, that God loves me the way I am, not the way I'm supposed to be by trying to get everything perfect, because you'll never get everything in order. Third thing that a stronghold, characteristics of a stronghold. Strongholds are spiritual forces that can open a door to darkness and thus give the enemy protected ground in our life. Wherever a stronghold exists, it can be a protected area that the enemy can occupy. But what did we say a few minutes earlier? If we cast the enemy out and the stronghold habit structure of thinking still there, what comes back within 2 weeks? The oppression can return again because we've not dealt with the root issue, the stronghold that's within our life. Strongholds, fourthly, exalt themselves above the knowledge of God. They give the demonic forces a secure place to influence our mind, our will, our emotions, and our personality. I catch my 14-year-old son devaluing my wife. I'm the guy that's out teaching deliverance seminars and marriage seminars and family seminars 12 years ago. I hadn't had a revelation of love. I didn't realize God had created me to be a gift of love. My car was at the shop. My son didn't know I was home. He came home from school, starts in on his mother, demeaning his mother, and I come out of the bedroom, and he looks at me and goes, "Ah!" Just panics, because he would never do that if his dad was in the house. He sees me. I come up, grab my 14-year-old son, smash his head into the back of the wall, hold him a foot off the ground. Let me show you how I'll treat people that treat my wife like that. And I teach the family parenting seminars. Where did that come from? What did Paul say in Romans 7? The things I want to do, I do not do, And the things I don't want to do, I do. You see, how did my dad treat my mother, and how did he treat me when we didn't do something right in his eyes? Again, we're not putting pointed fault on my father in this. What did we say? We're innocent of the wounding that took place in our mother and father's house, but we're responsible for our reaction to the wounding. And because I was thrown up against the wall many times, I was threatened with my life many times. You see what a stronghold is like? It's like you're riding down the highway doing 55. And when do I know I've moved from being influenced by a stronghold to being influenced by demonic powers? It's like moving in overdrive. You can be angry and sin not. But then once I let the anger at the way my son treated my wife move into verse 5, a speculation or imagination, thoughts and reasonings that determine my conduct between the bedroom and getting to my son, I'd already made a decision to put the fear of dad in him because it's what I grew up with. And it was like kicking into overdrive, and the stronghold opened the door up to demonic rage. Now, I know nobody else here has ever given their children what they deserve either, huh? Do I have to go back and try to make that right? Yeah. But I never had him try my authority again. But yeah, did it leave deep woundedness and fear? Mm-hmm. But see, all that does is as long as Dad's in the house, I'll keep in line. But as soon as I'm outside of Dad's presence, I'm going to run amok. Strongholds, fortresses of thought, habit structures of thinking that are wrong motivations and attitudes that protect and defend a person's walk in the flesh. Characteristic of a stronghold. Wrong motivations and attitudes that protect and defend a person's walk in the flesh. What did we say about Eros? If I've begun to look to get my love need and my need for attention, my need for acceptance, my need for belonging met through ungodly beliefs, it opens the door to darkness in my life. And now the motivation behind what I do in serving the Lord is based upon what do I get from all of this. My motivation behind prayer is based upon if I pray enough, God will bless me more. My motivation behind the Word is trying to move God for me to be a more mature Christian. And if I'm a more mature Christian, what do? I start building my little kingdom of being drawn people to myself. Wrong motivations that can come from strongholds based upon the flesh. Strongholds, another characteristic, have a sick core or center. They're like a boil on a person's body. And from this point, they can send forth poisons throughout the entire body, twisting thoughts, twisting emotions, twisting feelings throughout the soul. I was born with ears the size they are now. You look at my baby pictures, you'll go, my goodness. Thank goodness they never grew. I mean, if they would have grown, they would have been about this size right now, all right? But when you're 8 and 10, 12 years old, and you're in adult years as a little boy, what's everybody at school do to you? And then the girls that sit behind you in class, tormenting you and playing with your ears and constantly flipping them. And what do you begin to believe? You begin to believe what these kids say about you. And then you look in the mirror, and what do you see? There's a sick core, when you look in the mirror, 80% of people who look in the mirror hate what they see. I find it interesting. 80% of marriage is in trouble. 82% of people are emotionally unhealthy. 80% of Christians' thoughts are negative and accusatory and judgmental. You look in the mirror, you hate what you see, and you think you're ugly and you think you have no value. Do you realize I was over 40 years old before I can look in the mirror and say, oh yeah, it's not bad. I finally grew into my ears. All right. You see, but it's a stronghold that has a sick center. Proverbs 18:8, the words of a whisperer is as wounds that go down to the innermost parts of the being. Because words can literally become a habit structure of thinking. What was spoken over you over and over and over again as a child? You idiot. You're just an accident waiting to happen. You cost me more in emergency room hospital bills. What is the matter with you? Can't you do anything right? Now, many of us in this room have heard that, like me, thousands of times. So what do you conform to? You see, words, especially from teachers, classmates, mothers and fathers, authority in our life, words are like railroad tracks. And we're the train following the railroad track, and as hard as we try to jump off, we still find ourselves right on that track following the course of the words of what have been spoken over our life. And so I was clumsy, an accident waiting to happen all through childhood. I last count 15 scars below my elbows where I've had stitches. Of course, being a fisherman didn't help much. And, broken bones from one end of the body to the other. I could really ride motocross well. I'd only fell every now and then, but every fall ended up, in the hospital and with cast. And then with every accident comes the words again, what a failure you are. You're an accident waiting to happen. Habit structures of thinking that you begin to believe. And so it follows you all through life until you begin to apply the power of the cross and God's love to bring that stronghold down. And that's where we're leading to by Saturday, of how to bring these strongholds down, because it's not an act performed. I'm not going to give you a formula that if you do this, you'll finally break it free. We've already tried all the formulas, haven't we? It's a posture of the heart. A position of the heart that opens your heart up to God's love coming in and displacing fears, because, there's something about darkness. Have you realized you can't cast darkness out? Just tell me, give me a list that I can cast out the 12 points of darkness we had in the first session. Didn't you all start, you're hanging around for the list of how to cast those 12 out. You can't cast it out. You can only turn the light on. There's certain things that you cannot cast out in your life. You can't cast out fear. Because what is fear? Fear is the absence of love. And if you do not feel safe and secure in Daddy Larry's heart, Daddy God's heart, what comes in? Insecurities. Fear of trusting. Fear of rejection. Fear of opening your heart. And if you cast out fear, but you haven't had love come back, what comes back in 14 days? Fear comes right back in. And you can't cast out darkness. You turn the light on, and light dispels darkness. And that's where we're moving to. But wherever darkness resides, strongholds exist, and strongholds can lie so hidden within our soul that we do not even recognize or identify them as a stronghold or as sin, but we take on the attitude, well, hey, this is the way I've always been. I'm a Frost. Frost men don't feel. We don't show emotions. Men don't cry. If you cry, I'll give you something to cry about. And so I'm born again. I'm teaching the parenting seminars, but I have no emotions. I'm emotionally detached as a dedicated Christian leader that has no ability to empathize and feel the pain of my children or for my wife. Or when I get intense and I move back into that stronghold of being a frost and ruling with fear and intimidation, you can't even see it. You don't see it because no. You never see it first until you step in it, and somebody else always smells it first and then accuses you of it, all right? And what we don't realize, because the stronghold is there, we will justify it with our rightness. And see, when we have strongholds still operating in our life, we'd rather be right than do right. It's part of a characteristic of a stronghold. Strongholds produce negative thoughts within us that block us from giving or receiving love. Strongholds restrict our knowledge of God's love. Strongholds give us tunnel vision so we don't see right from wrong clearly. Strongholds can shape our value system, how we value and treat other people. Have you noticed how easy it is to value and honor good people that say and do everything right for you? But as soon as you have a difficult person in your life, our language about that person is language of superiority, and we devalue and we dishonor and we belittle people that don't think and know as much as us. And yet we're born again, we're Spirit-filled, we're the leaders within a church perhaps. But strongholds still distorting our ability to have healthy relationships in the way we treat other people. Strongholds can make straight thinking difficult by guarding our weak spots with false feelings and emotions. Strongholds are constantly sending negative messages to our mind, will, and emotions. As a child, one of the greatest needs a child has is large amounts of praise. I heard James Dobson say one time that it takes 40 words of praise to counteract one word of criticism in the heart of a child. Well, what if you're raised with two phys ed coaches, that a mom and dad, or father a tennis coach and mother a phys ed coach, that came up in a season when where parents pretty much motivated out of fear and temptation and authority and pointed out what you did wrong. And there was almost never any affirmation. And yet affirmation is something everyone in this room longs for. Just someone to come up to us and say, "You did a good job. I like you," smile at you. "I'm proud of you." And it's a need every one of us has. And every one of us longs to hear God say the words to us. He said to his son in Mark 1:11, "You're the son I love and in whom I'm well pleased." Well, what if that need from a child to receive from a parent went unmet? And there was never praise that comes in. A definition of a need is something that if unmet makes a person sick. But a need is something that if met makes a person well. And now that you're well, you can begin to help meet another person's need. But a need is something, if unmet, makes a person sick. And what do we say about if you had a huge love deficit in your life, then our love is a love that is so distorted, its only purpose for being is to get need met. So I go all through childhood and I don't get praised by my mother. And then I go through teenage years and I'm Dumbo by the girls. So what's happening within my mind, will, and emotions and personality? One criticism at a time, just like building a fortress of one block of stone at a time, hundreds being placed in daily, weekly in my life, to where a fortress of thought is built that longs for the praise of a woman in my life. Because when a little boy is hanging from his legs out on the swing set, is he calling for dad first or does he call for mom first? You see, the little boy wants to be praised by mom. And there's something within the male that wants praise and affirmation from the female. Just like there's something in the female wants praise and affirmation from the male. And because that wasn't met in my life, there was a huge unmet need, a strong hold, an ungodly belief that once I'm born again, that need's gone, isn't it? I don't need it anymore. I'm a new creation in Christ. Well, I made straight A's in Bible school on that theology. But it didn't work. And so when I became a pastor, and then I'm on staff in a large church with several thousand members, and I'm put over altar ministry, who is it that I'm most attracted to pray for every Sunday that's all around the altars? The men or the women? You're more drawn to ministering to the women because if you minister to them and pray over them so tenderly and gently, they begin to think you're so wonderful, and then they begin to stroke you, telling you how wonderful. And see, in the beginning, it's not a sexual issue. What is it? It's a habit structure of thinking because I never had this need met by a mom. Now, through my ministry, I'm going to draw women to myself. And if you don't understand this, we all know where that can take us. Because sooner or later, a connection would be made. But my wife would wonder, after church on Sunday, we'd go home, and every Sunday afternoon is a fight. Because she would, how can you be so tender and gentle and pray so nurturing with them, and then you come home, and it's like you're miserable when you're home. When you're ministering to the women at church, you're aglow. And then you come home to me, and you don't have anything left for me. You can imagine what my week was like. Every week. But see, what did I not understand? That there was a fortress of thought, there was a habit structure of thinking that had a sick core within it that literally sent negative messages to my soul that I'm trying to get an unhealed need met through ministering to people. So it affected my priorities in life. It affected the way I related to every human being because, again, what's the definition of eros love? The whole ministry was built upon eros, not agape. A love that had become so distorted by the lack of affirmation and praise in my childhood that its only purpose now is to get that unhealed need met through the ministry, through praying for people. And if I wasn't allowed to pray for people in the church, I'm going to go find a church I can pray for people at. An unhealed need, a stronghold. Strongholds can cause us to draw negative conclusions of how we relate to people. You see, I'd rather be right than have relationship. How about you? When something goes wrong in one of your relationships, do you wait for them to respond and make it right before you deal with your issues? And strongholds literally can affect the way we relate to each person, the way we conclude, the conclusions we draw about every relationships, and they end up causing us to do what we do not want to do. Now, Jesus said this in John 14:30. The ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. Now, why could the enemy not affect Jesus? He had no ungodly beliefs or habit structures of thinking that the enemy could come in and use as an open door into his life. But there's a verse in 1 John 5:18, he was born of God, keeps him, and the evil one does not touch him. Anywhere in your life that is born of God's love, the enemy has no right to traffic in that area of your life. You have a place of divine immunity in that area. But any area of your life that still has strongholds wired to it, what happens? The enemy does have a right to come in. And do you know anybody that does not have an open door somewhere in their life? And see, that's my cry now and my challenge. Father, I want to move into the place to where your love has so consumed me that the enemy cannot touch me, that the enemy's coming, but he has nothing in me. And see, that begins in a life that's longing to move from darkness into light. And I'm asked this and told all the time, how can you be so real and open and transparent? When you understand this, how can you afford not to be? Because not to be opens a door to darkness in our life. But as we begin to realize the power of God's love to displace this, you see, I find freedom comes in two areas. We said earlier that much of it is renewing the mind of these issues. And it speaks about that in Romans 12, verse 2, about don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Speaks about it again in Ephesians 4:23, to renew the spirit of your mind. And I focused being a performance, list-oriented, task-oriented individual. In the 80s, I'm going to focus on renewing my mind, positive confession, taking every thought captive, casting down every thought, and I wore myself out trying to keep every thought in line with God's love. But renewing the mind is only half your freedom. Because if you still have a love deficit in your life, do you know the struggle you're going to have continually trying to keep your thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ? Because the other half of freedom for my life, at least my journey and experience, was Romans 5:5. The Holy Spirit pouring the love of God abroad in my heart. What I now call a supernatural breaking forth of God's love in a core area of need. Because that hard, intense, driven personality celebrated the 10th anniversary Friday. That hard, intense, driven personality in 45 minutes in a supernatural encounter in Father God's love, my wife said, changed me more than the previous 15 years combined of walking with God. That experience and how to position your heart is in chapter 1, Experiencing the Father's Embrace, or it outlines it all through the audio series, Restoring the Father's Love, which was the event we did here 2 years ago. And so see, half of our journey towards freedom is, yes, understanding how the root system in us has been functioning to steal the life of God's love, but the other half is positioning our heart, not performing, not an act performed, but positioning our heart for love to find us. Love to find us right where we are. And so that's where we seek to close our meetings with. As we seek to facilitate a supernatural breaking forth of God's love in your core area of need. For me, it happened with nobody praying for me. Yes, it was a large corporate group, but nobody laying hands on me. And my wife said that was the turning point for my life. That was the realization when I realized I was created for God's love. And so we're going to close this session out, but then we're going to make a little change. And how can we posture our heart right now for God's love to find us? To help prepare us for this, then you can close off the video. We appreciate that. I used to think I had to act or perform or pray enough or do enough for God's love to find me and to touch me in any certain way. Thank you, Doug. I literally was so emotionally and relationally handicapped, abused physically by mother and father, sexually abused at 12 by neighbors, a life of just agony and pain. And I felt there's no way God could find me unless I did something. And 10 years ago, I began to realize the river always flows to the lowest place. Water always seeks the lowest place. And the river of God's love always flows to those that are the most wounded, the most broken, the most handicapped, the most disabled. And we're going to look at a 5-minute video to prepare our heart for a time of ministry here. Some of us have seen it, many have not. It's a video about a father and son. And the father was a world-class athlete that would run these 110-mile triathlons and biking and swimming and run a marathon of 26 miles. And when his son was born completely handicapped, unable to speak, a paraplegic, unable to move. Doctor said, put him in a home somewhere, he'll never be anything but a vegetable. But as he began to grow, they realized he was quite intelligent and his mind worked like any other person's mind. It's just the body did not function. And the father was so disappointed, longing to give birth to a son that he could train to be an athlete. They were able to get him a computer with a computer keyboard, and the son could, with a pencil in his mouth, type out and learn to walk or talk through the computer. And he asked his dad, Dad, can I run with you one day? And Dad said, no, I've got to come in at the head of the pack. I've got to win the race. But the son was insistent. Would you just run race? Push me in the wheelchair around the race. Finally, he said, I'll run one 5-mile race with you. And he pushed him in the wheelchair, came in next to last. The son got back on the computer keyboard and said, Dad, when I ran with you, I felt like my disabilities disappeared. And the dad said, from then on, I'll never run at the head of pack alone again. I'd rather be at the last and be with my son. And what I want you to see on this is as the father is pushing the son, carrying him through this 110-mile event, there is no self-assertion on the part of the son to cross the finish line. When we have strongholds in our life, our walk with God is full of self-assertion. Thinking through our hyper-religious activity, our aggressive striving, we can get to God. What I want you to see here is the son does nothing. How do we have strongholds displaced? No self-assertion. It's a posture of the heart. I'm helpless without you carrying me today, Father. And let's watch this together and turn down the lights if we can. We might need to put this down for some of the folks there.
Who taught the sun where to stand in the morning? And who told the ocean you can only come this far?